At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, we were in a crisis that affected every single person in this world. And we were all depending on public health institutions to uplift its priority, which is to safeguard community, to safeguard our lives. And what we experienced during that time is that our institutions weren't prepared to safeguard our lives. And we saw that in the evidence of the data that were lacking, that were not there to share about the lived experiences and the experiences we were having as Native people in the face of this crisis, this pandemic. This traumatic experience that was re-traumatizing so many of us. We were literally experiencing data sets that were being generated by state, local, and even national groups, public health institutions, that failed to contain information about Native people. And without data to describe the impacts of COVID, for example, in our communities, then we can't understand where the intervention can be placed. We can't make any judgments about the funding needed to safeguard our communities. And in response to this outrageous, unethical ignorance of our institutions of public health, our leaders gathered in Indian country, and one of those leaders is Abigail Echohawk, who is leading a national movement on decolonizing data to safeguard the lives of Native people for her thriving future generations, to interrupt the colonizing and colonial ways of these institutions of public health, so that they can heal themselves, so that they can consider and prepare and really safeguard the lives of Native people by meeting the needs of Native people. And so Abigail, in her strength of advocacy to bring the best to our community and to interrupt these colonizing practices, coined the term data genocide. And she coined that term as a way to describe what is happening when these state, national, and local institutions of public health fail to gather and contain data about Native people. Data genocide is an indicator of erasure. It indicates that if data do not include the lives of Native people, then it's perpetuating a system of erasure, which is perpetuating a system of genocide. We lost lives unnecessarily because we didn't have the data to understand the impacts and solutions and opportunities for intervention during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that was a result of a lack of preparation for these white-dominated institutions prior to the pandemic to consider and meet the needs of Native people.
The FGC provided wraparound support to at least 34,575 people over the course of the emergency declaration. We were able to do that because of the relationships we have with our community. How we build relationships and what we value are dependent on how we are socialized.
So the cycle of socialization happens in a couple stages. We have our first set of socialization, which is our primary, and that is influenced by those closest to us, family and friendships. And so these help shape our beliefs and attitudes and behaviors towards the world. And then once we get out of the primary source of socialization, we enter into the second context, which would be more like schools, medical systems, other institutions that will either reinforce these beliefs that we have, or they can also kind of challenge us and contradict what we have been taught. And the societal culture, that kind of like TV, media, any of those all have an impact on us. It could be subconsciously or it could be conscious ways that influence biases, right? These assumptions about us. And so once we kind of get a hold of those, we carry these out into the world. And sometimes that means like either we're maintaining that same societal norm, or sometimes we may feel that that doesn't resonate with us. But either way, it kind of just tends to keep going in this cycle where, again, we're maintaining that societal structure.
The relationships we build can be interrupted by the implicit or internalized biases we are socialized with. While we can't avoid bias, we can become aware of it in ourselves and work to interrupt it.
Internal bias really skews the way that we tell our stories. Assumptions are often made about our race, who makes up our group. The things that matter to the people recording data aren't often reflective of the stories we want to tell. We often see that we're undercounted in various ways. We see that funders are looking for things that matter more to dominant culture than the issues that communities are actually facing.
My social environment has really conditioned me, as with any human being. The way your social environment and your upbringing really creates how you see the world and the data and information that you take in on a daily basis. So that internal bias shows up as my brain daily is constantly receiving and analyzing information and data and experiences, feelings, all of that. And it's almost subconsciously looking for patterns, and that's creating bias, right? So my social environment is conditioning me to create those biases and apply them every day to the way that I think and the way that I walk through the world. And so it takes practice and skill to be able to disrupt those or notice them when they're happening of, wait, but why do I have that feeling about this certain person or this population or this gender or this space or the government? It's because you've been socially conditioned to do so, and my brain is pretty much on autopilot, processing that data and information and applying it on a daily basis.
When we think about data and the influences of the quality of the data, or even the completeness of data, we really have to think about who's gathering those data, what methodologies and points of view have been used to create the tools and the instruments to gather those data. When we're relying on systems and research methodologies that are carried forward and informed by sort of dominant populations that doesn't include input from community itself. If our data are only informed by people who know us through stereotypes, then we risk the potential of erasure and perpetuating systems of genocide for our people. And when systems, white dominant systems, fail to understand the lasting impacts of colonization and ongoing impacts of settler colonialism and how that shapes our ideas about Native people, then they're at risk of being complicit to further harming Indigenous people and creating systems of inequity.
Nobody knows our community like our community. Native people need to be the people telling our stories. For so long, we've had people make assumptions about who we are, where we come from, what we value, and no one can really tell that like we can.